Hello, welcome to week 9. This is where everything we've built over the last few weeks comes together. We've learned about distribution, sampling, variability, and probability. Now we're ready for the formal machinery, hypothesis testing. Let me start with an analogy that will carry us through this entire section. Imagine you're a detective. Someone has committed a crime and you have a suspect. The question you're trying to answer is this person guilty? But here's the thing. You don't prove guilt directly. That's not how evidence works. Instead, you ask a much clearer question. How likely is this evidence if the suspect is innocent? If the evidence is extremely unlikely under the assumption of innocence, you infer guilt. Not because you've proven it beyond any doubt, but because innocence no longer explains the data well. Hypothesis testing in statistics works exactly the same way. You don't prove that an effect is real. You ask, how likely is my data if there is no effect? If the data are very unlikely under that no effect world, you conclude that an effect probably does exist. This is the heart of hypothesis testing, and it's the source of nearly every misconception students have about p-values. So we're going to be very careful with the language here. So let's formalize this. We start with the null hypothesis. The null hypothesis is usually abbreviated HO, and it represents a very specific claim. It's the hypothesis that nothing is happening, that there is no effect, no difference, no relationship. If you're testing whether a new study technique improves exam scores, the null hypothesis is the new technique has zero effect. Students who use it score the same as students who don't. If you're comparing two therapy groups, the null hypothesis is both groups are drawn from the same population. There's no difference between them. The null hypothesis is always a claim about the population, not the sample. It's not saying our sample showed no difference. It's saying in the actual world, the effect size is 0. Now, why start there? Why begin with the assumption that nothing is happening? Because it gives you a baseline. It's a straw man, a specific testable claim that you can knock down if your evidence is strong enough. The null hypothesis is boring. It's the nothing to see here hypothesis, and that's exactly why you start with it. Then you have the alternative hypothesis, usually written as H1 or HA. This is the hypothesis that something is happening, that there is an effect, a difference, a relationship. The alternative hypothesis is what you suspect might be true. But here's the critical part. You don't prove the alternative by showing it's better than nothing. You provisionally accept the alternative by showing that the data are very unlikely if the null were true. So the logic is, assume the null is true. Look at your data. Ask, how surprising is this data in the null world? If the answer is very surprising, you reject the null and provisionally accept the alternative. This brings us to the p-value. And I want to be very precise here because this is where the confusion starts. The p-value is not the probability that your hypothesis is true. It is not the probability that your result is real. It is not the probability that you'll replicate your finding. Here's what it actually is. The p-value is the probability of observing data as extreme as or more extreme than what you actually observed, given that the null hypothesis is true. In other words, it's a conditional probability. The condition is that the null is true. The probability is calculated under that condition. Let me give you a concrete example. You run a study comparing two groups. Your sample mean difference is 5 points. You calculate that if the null were true, if there were actually no difference in the population, you'd see a difference of 5 or more points only 3% of the time just by random sampling variability. So your p-value is 0.03. Now, what does that mean? It means if the null were true, results this extreme would happen 3% of the time by chance. That's it. That's all it means. It does not mean that there's a 97% chance your result is real. It does not mean that there's a 97% chance that the effect will replicate. Those are different questions entirely. The p-value is answering a very specific question. How compatible is my data with the null hypothesis? A small p-value means the data are not very compatible with the null. A large p-value means the data are quite compatible with the null. We see results like this fairly often when nothing is happening. Think about that for a moment. A p-value of 0.03 is compatible with the null in the sense that it's not impossible. It's just unlikely. If the null were true, it would happen about 30 times per 10,000 studies. We don't say that's impossible. We say that's a rare enough finding that I'm skeptical of the null hypothesis. This is a crucial distinction, and it sets up our next idea. So here's the question. How rare does the data have to be before you reject the null? How low does the p-value have to go? That's where the decision threshold, or alpha, comes in. Alpha is written as the Greek letter alpha. By convention, and it is a convention, not a law of nature, we usually set alpha at 0.05. This is written as alpha equals 0.05. That means if the p-value is less than 0.05, I will reject the null hypothesis. If the p-value is 0.05 or greater, I will fail to reject the null hypothesis. What does alpha equal 0.05 mean in plain English? It means if the null hypothesis is true, I'm willing to incorrectly reject it 5% of the time. We call this a type 1 error, or a false positive. You're seeing an effect that isn't really there. Now, you might wonder, why 0.05? Why not 0.01 or 0.10? The truth is, there's no magical reason. In 1925, Ronald Fisher suggested 1 in 20 as a reasonable cutoff for surprising, and that became 0.05. It's been the standard ever since. It's a convention, not carved in stone. Some fields use 0.01. Some use 0.10. In very large studies with serious consequences, you might use something much more stringent, but 0.05 is the default. There's a sociological point worth sitting with here. George Cobb, a statistician who helped prompt the American Statistical Association to issue its landmark 2016 statement on p-values, captured the problem with a simple exchange. Why do so many colleges and grad schools teach p equals 0.05? Because that's still what the scientific community and journal editors use. Why do so many people still use p equals 0.05? Because that's what they were taught in college or grad school. We teach it because it's what we do. We do it because it's what we teach. That's not a principled scientific foundation. It's an inherited convention sustained by inertia. And here's what makes that more uncomfortable. The ASA's 2016 statement, which we'll engage with directly in the next lecture, states explicitly that a p-value near 0.05 taken by itself offers only weak evidence against the null hypothesis. Not moderate evidence, weak evidence. So the threshold that the entire field has treated as the gold standard for scientific discovery is, in view of the world's largest professional statistics association, a threshold where even a successful result counts as weak evidence. We'll come back to that. Here's the critical point. Alpha equals 0.05 is not about truth. It's not saying there's a 95% chance your result is real. It's a decision rule. It's saying, here's my line. If the data fall on one side of this line, I'm going to make one decision. If they fall on the other side, I'm going to make a different decision. Let me make this concrete. Imagine you run 100 studies where the null hypothesis is actually true. the effect really is 0 in the population. If you use alpha equals 0.05, how many will you incorrectly reject the null for? Well, about 5. Not because the effect becomes real in those 5 cases, because of random sampling variability. By chance, those 5 studies happened to produce results that fell below your 0.05 threshold, even though nothing was happening. That's a type 1 error. Now, let's directly address the misconceptions, because these are common and they're important. Misconception number 1. If p is less than 0.05, there's a 95% chance the result is real. This is wrong. This is called the inverse probability fallacy. The p-value tells you the probability of the data given the null. It does not tell you the probability of the null given the data. Those are different things. Here's an analogy. Suppose I tell you, if it's raining, there's an 80% chance the grass is wet. You see the grass is wet. Can you conclude that there's an 80% chance it's raining? No. The grass could be wet because someone watered it, or because of morning dew, or 100 other reasons. The conditional probability goes one direction. You can't flip it around without doing additional maths. A p-value of 0.05 does not mean there's a 95% chance the effect is real. It means if the effect were 0, you'd see results this extreme 5% of the time. That's a fundamentally different claim. Misconception number 2. If p is greater than 0.05, there's no effect. This is also wrong. This is called the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence problem. A p-value greater than 0.05 means you don't have strong evidence against the null, but that doesn't mean the null is true. It might mean your sample was too small. It might mean the effect is there, but subtle, and you didn't have enough statistical power to detect it. Imagine you run a study with 20 people in each group. You're looking for an effect, but it turns out p is equal to 0.08. Is there no effect? Not necessarily. With n equals 20, you have low power. You can only reliably detect large effects. A small to medium effect might exist and you'd miss it. So, failure to reject the null is not the same as accepting the null. These are not the same thing. Misconception number 3. This result is approaching significance. You will encounter this phrase constantly in published research. Researchers use it when p falls somewhere between 0.05 and 0.10. The result didn't clear the threshold, so they describe it as almost there. You'll also see marginally significant, trending towards significance, and borderline significant. These are all versions of the same problem. There is no statistical category called approaching significance. Alpha is a decision rule. You committed to a threshold before collecting data. Either your result cleared it or it didn't. Treating p is equal to 0.07 as almost significant smuggles a continuous interpretation into what is supposed to be a binary decision, which is precisely the kind of reasoning the framework was designed to prevent. There's also a deeper problem. Recall what we just said. The ASA's position that a p-value near 0.05 offers only weak evidence. So a researcher reporting p equals 0.06 and describing it as approaching significance is implying they almost have strong evidence, when in reality even p equals 0.049 would count as weak evidence. The phrase layers an inflated interpretation onto a non-significant result. It compounds the problem instead of acknowledging it. Let me give you a quick check question. This is the kind of thing you need to be able to articulate clearly. A study gets p is equal to 0.03. What does this mean? And this is the most important part. What does it not mean? Here's the right answer. P is equal to 0.03 means if the null hypothesis were true, you'd observe results this extreme or more extreme, only 3% of the time, just by random sampling variability. It does not mean there's a 97% chance the result is real. It does not mean the effect will replicate 97% of the time. It does not mean the effect is large or important. It simply tells you that your data are somewhat incompatible with the null hypothesis. The p-value is a statement about the data conditional on the null being true. It is not a statement about how likely the null or alternative actually are. That would depend on the prior probability, what you believed before you saw the data, and that's not something that the p-value captures. Before we finish, I want to mention one more concept briefly because it rounds out the picture. We have type 1 error, falsely rejecting the null when it's true, but there's also type 2 error, which is failing to reject the null when the alternative is actually true. We call this a false negative. Type 2 error is controlled by something called statistical power. Power is the probability that your test will detect an effect if it actually exists. Power is affected by three things: your sample size, the size of the effect you're trying to detect, and your significance level, alpha. Bigger samples give you more power. Larger effects are easier to detect, so power increases. And if you use a more lenient alpha, say 0.10 instead of 0.05, you get more power, but you also accept more type 1 error. This is the fundamental trade-off in statistics. You can't minimize both type 1 and type 2 error at the same time. You choose your tolerance for each, and that determines your sample size. That's why power analysis matters when you're designing a study. But that's getting ahead of ourselves. For now, just know that type 2 error exists, and it's about missing real effects. So here's where we are. We've built the conceptual foundation for hypothesis testing. The null hypothesis gives us a baseline. The p-value tells us how surprising our data are under that baseline. Alpha gives us a decision rule, and we understand the two types of error we can make. In the next lecture, week 9b, we're going to apply all of this. We're going to work with the t-test, which is the workhorse of psychology research. We'll see how the t-test formalizes this logic of comparing groups and calculating p-values. And then we're going to address the hardest part, what p-values do not tell us. Specifically, they don't tell us about effect size, and they don't tell us whether a result is practically important. That's for next time. See you then. Bye.